Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm very much encouraged by what I have heard from you today, that you do plan to move on this and to investigate this matter. And that is basically what my family and I desire, is to get to the bottom of this and make sure that it never happens to another family, because we have lived a nightmare. We will be living this nightmare for ages to come. It's something that probably we will never really be able to get closure, because it was just such a useless thing that happened to my husband. I don't have any notes. My husband hated notes. Obviously, he can't be here, and I'm here on his behalf. So I'm just speaking from the heart. And I think he would not want me to have notes. He didn't. He never read. He always spoke. I was fortunate enough to have been married to this amazing man for nearly 56 years. And I won't say that it was always pleasant or smooth or anything, and I don't think any marriages are, but we worked together in his office. We were married when he was in law school. And I worked and helped him make his way through law school, and then we moved to Albany and made our home there. And he immediately began to get involved in civic matters, community matters. He taught Sunday school at 42 years and was still teaching when he passed away. He was a gifted speaker. Really, I want these people to know what kind of person that has perished because of their lack of concern. My family is bitter. We are angry. We're heartbroken. We're devastated. And I'm just kind of here begging you to do something about the matter. I cannot say enough good about him. He was bigger than life in any setting that you put him in. And I worked in his office alongside of him, so I have seen all sides and have seen him interact with all classes of people in all situations. And he had a gift of working with people. He was compassionate. He wanted to help the people that needed it. He was always wanted the victim in any situation to be taken care of and given full consideration. And it's ironic that he winds up the victim in this. Our family, I can't begin to tell you what I have lost. My soulmate, my partner, words can't describe. Our older children, our older grandchildren, he was their anchor, their rock. They looked to him for advice. He guided the older ones through college and helped them decide what steps or what direction that they wanted to take. Our oldest granddaughter became an attorney based upon her appreciation, I think, for him and the work that he did. And he had 2 more years left in his term as judge. He planned to complete that term and go in practice with our granddaughter and help her get started. Now, she has no one. Our younger grandchildren have lost the best playmate they ever had. He played anything that our grandchildren asked him. They could dress him up. They could do anything. And he was happy to do it. I mean, they all wanted Pawpaw. Our youngest granddaughter asked him, even when gas prices were so high, and they still are, asked him, "You drive me around, Pops, and let me just read." And he would get her in the car, and he would drive and let her read her books. She's now in the 6th grade, and she's an avid reader. But these are some of the things that we're going to miss. He had a brilliant legal mind. He studied the law. Every weekend on Friday, he wanted all the opinions of the appellate courts printed out, and that was his weekend's reading. He would get kind of miffed at us if we didn't get it done, because that would ruin his weekend. Now, he wasn't a sick individual. He was healthy. He walked 3 miles every morning before I would even get out of bed. He wanted to stay active. He didn't have the appearance of a 78-year-old man until about the 2nd injection. And then we began to see the difference. Where he had walked those streets every morning, he was stumbling, he was losing his balance, he fell often, he began to have headaches, which he never had before. And I was really concerned by his appearance. He had the look of someone who might have cancer. He had a physical examination just maybe 2 weeks before he fell sick, before he came sick, and they found nothing wrong. The only problems he had were kidney stones and allergies, neither of which I think would have taken his life. On the 11th of September, he began to have numbness in his hand, and we begged him to go to the emergency room, and he declined. That evening, he had a bad headache, and then he told me that 2 fingers on his hand were not right. He couldn't use those 2 fingers. Then it became his fist. He couldn't. But he still would not go to the emergency room. He just was an individual that was not sick that much, and he wasn't going to go to doctors. He just didn't go until he had to. The next morning, of course, he had been up, and when I got up, he was hollering for me out in the kitchen. He had a horrible look on his face. I'll never forget that expression. And he said, "My legs don't work." He said, "I've been out twice to get my paper, and I've fallen twice." Our daughter is a nurse, and I called her, and she took him to the emergency room. I believe they did a CT scan there, and it didn't show anything, but based on his symptoms, they transferred him to Vanderbilt in Nashville. To back up, he had had a car accident in March, the last of March, and had injured his lumbar and cervical spine. And he had gone through the physical therapy. He had done everything the doctors had told him to do in an effort to try to get better, to be able to work was number one on his mind, get back on the job. He was transferred. He was referred to a Dr. Abrams, a neurosurgeon at St. Thomas. And that's where he received these injections, at the St. Thomas Neurosurgical Outpatient Center. They admitted him to Vanderbilt on the 12th. He immediately, just within a day or two, started declining fast. I mean, rapidly. His speech became slurred. He lost the use. He had no grip in his left hand. He could not move his left foot. He had no eye-hand coordination. He could not feed himself. It was a nightmare to see this man who was perfectly healthy one moment, and then just so quickly going downhill. And everything the doctors were doing for him was to no avail. The medicine, whatever they did, it was not helping him in the least. And he just declined so rapidly that on the 17th, he passed away. And people, it was not an easy death that we witnessed. And these are human beings that these committees, the FDA, the NECC, whoever is responsible, I want them to know their lack of attention to their duties cost my husband his life, cost my family, it cost them a loss that we'll never recover from. And if you don't do your job, it may not appear to be anything to you, but you are affecting human lives, valuable human lives. My husband was valuable to us. And I cannot beg you enough. Bipartisan, go, I don't care what party, work together and
we will do.
Legislate this so no other family has to go through what we have.
Ms. Lovelace, thank you very much for your poignant testimony, your statement. I'm just going to ask two questions, short and brief. The first one is, when you found out that your husband was the first of many to be linked to this contaminated products distributed by the NECC, do you remember when that was, how long after he died, and secondly, who was it that informed you about this?
He passed away on September the 17th, and we went ahead with the funeral services and everything, thinking that he had a stroke because that was their diagnosis. On the 3rd of October, I believe it was, we began to hear about the contamination on from these injections.
From the press?
Yes.
Who told?
Through the press.
Yeah.
My son-in-law, I think, was the first that read it or heard it. On October the 5th, I received a call from a reporter from the Nashville Tennessean, and he told me that a spokesperson at Vanderbilt had issued a statement that a 78-year-old man had died from the contaminated steroids.
So the first you heard about it was from the Vanderbilt Hospital?
The first I heard about it was from...
So no one from the FDA or the Center for Disease Control, did they ever contact you?
No. St. Thomas did not contact me.
So we actually heard about it through a press report?
Press.
And no one from the state of Tennessee contacted you?
No.
Did they subsequently, after you heard through the press, did the state of Tennessee or FDA or the Center for Disease and Control?
I got on the internet to try to find out something about it, and I saw a phone number on there, and I called it.
So you initiated it?
Yes.
No one from outside came to you?
No one.
Even after the press reports? And the Vanderbilt Hospital, did the doctor call you?
No, the Vanderbilt didn't know about him having the injections.
Okay. Okay.
It was over at St. Thomas. Now, on the 25th, and bear in mind that his funeral was the 21st, on the 25th, someone from St. Thomas called my cell phone and asked how Mr. Eddie was doing from his procedure. And I was really taken aback because we had just buried him. And I told her so. And, well, she was so sorry what happened. And I said, well, they believe he had a stroke. So then the next day, a different lady from the same place called, wanting to know what his symptoms were, how long he had had the symptoms, and whether or not we had an autopsy performed. And neither person mentioned contamination, meningitis, anything like that.
You know, it's a possibility that what you say is a stroke. There might have been people that had died because of the contamination prior to your husband that were elderly, and they attributed to a stroke. And we'll never know. I think my last concern is the feeling I have that you had no contact with the FDA and these other folks that I mentioned. I think if they did contact you and told you about it, I think what you would say to them is, why didn't you stop it?
Right.
And obviously, if you had to talk to Mr. Cadden, who is the CEO of NECC, you could say, how in the world would you be so oblivious to the lack of quality control and all the notices that you got prior to your manufacturing these large numbers of drug? So that's the questions I want to ask. I want to thank you again for your courage to come here, and I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Gett from Colorado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up, Ms. Lovelace, on some of the things the chairman was saying, because when they went over to inspect NECC, they found vials with little black stuff in them, and they found insects near the areas and terrible working conditions. And you know, sometimes in this committee we've seen this before with food manufacturers, and we all sit here and we say, how could this happen in the 21st century and the most civilized country in the world? And the reason why it is so important that you came today, and it's so hard for you, I'm sure, is because it's easy for regulators and for Congress people to talk about this in the abstract, and for you being here, there's hundreds of people around the country who have either lost loved ones who were just as cherished to them as your husband was to you, or they're sick and they're still sick. So I want to let you know it makes a big difference for you to come here today, and I want to thank you for doing it. It's not easy, I know. And I also want to let you know that with some of the food safety issues that we identified a few years ago, we actually did pass legislation that clarified it. And so as hard as this is, and as senseless and unnecessary as this is, I will guarantee you that I'll be working with Mr. Upton and the entire committee, Democrats and Republicans, to make sure we clarify this. And I think one of the problems, as well as just sloppiness on the part of the Massachusetts Regulatory Agency and the FDA, the other problem was this gray area in the compounding pharmaceutical law, where the FDA wasn't really sure if they had jurisdiction or if they'd be sued in court. We can fix that, and I will guarantee you we will fix that. And when we do fix that, unlike these regulators, we'll call you and let you know. Okay? So thank you very much for coming, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields, yes. We will open the floor for additional questions. Just to remind members, we have the second panel is Barry Cadden, who's the CEO of NECC, as well as we have the third panel. So if anyone would like to ask a question, Mr. Burgess, recognized from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lovelace, I do appreciate you being here and sharing your story with us. You made the comment that your husband was important to your family. I'll just stress that he's important to this committee as well. And just like the ranking member, when she was talking about some of the food safety investigation we've done, I mean, your story as you were relating it was just so similar to this very room. Maybe 2 years ago, we heard a similar story about salmonella, and the family actually learned about it, that the loss of their loved one, they learned about it through the newspaper, that maybe it was the tomatoes in the salad or wherever it was, wherever the contaminant was from, and the same things, the place where things were grown, there was obvious areas where there was contamination going on. We've read the memos, and we understand the litany of problems that existed at this manufacturer. Can I just ask you a couple of questions to clarify in my mind the timeline that the clinical course that your husband had? He had the automobile accident, and roughly when was that?
March 30th of this year.
Okay, and then his treatment at the outpatient facility for the steroid injections, he had 2 of those?
3.
3, and so I guess the last one would have occurred when?
August 31st.
And his illness began?
The 11th. Well, it really began before, but it was really magnified on the 11th.
So roughly not quite 2 weeks afterwards. And when he was admitted to the hospital when he was transferred to Vanderbilt, when did that occur?
That was on the 12th, the morning.
So he had a pretty rapid decline in his clinical
He
course.
did.
Now, do the doctors know in coming into Vanderbilt that he had had the previous outpatient therapy at the other facility?
No, I don't believe he did. Our daughter accompanied him to the hospital, and I don't believe that that was in his history when he was admitted.
And it may not have occurred to anyone to ask, and obviously now in retrospect, this all becomes very intertwined. I mean, this is tough, what you've been through. We don't have an opportunity to talk to them, but I suspect it's tough for the doctors involved as well.
I'm sure he
For the doctor who provided the steroid injection, as well as the doctors that were treating, not
Uh,
knowing what they were up against.
I'm amazed that they were ordering medicine from someone that had that reputation.
Well, that's part of our problem, that information may not have gotten to where it needed to get. Well, again, we appreciate your courage and your strength for being here and relating this to us today. It is an important part of this story, and certainly look forward to what we can do for you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.